All right, this is going to be the pilot episode for the show. So, first and foremost, welcome to the pilot episode. And as the title would suggest, time to grow up, dad. There's going to be a very, very significant theme here for this show and this podcast. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But for whatever reason, you're tuning into this and you're watching it without knowing who I am, which is hello. um, my name is Chong. I am a clinical and sports nutritionist and a strength coach, and I've been in the industry since 2018. I graduated back in uni since 2018. So that's just a little bit about me. But this podcast is not going to be about health and nutrition and training and sports performance and all that kind of stuff. It might potentially be a topic of choice during some episodes with guests that I intend to bring onto the show, and we'll talk a little bit about the format about this in a little bit. But the core of the podcast is not such. So we'll start with the title. The title is a reflection on me and my realization that becoming a dad is not just about becoming a dad. It's more so like your newborn toddler situation. It's about growing up. Just like how kids grow up to become adults, I would like to at least grow up and continue to grow to be a competent dad. Hence the title. And if you actually looked at the logo as well, on one side there's obviously sort of a picture of a dad tossing his kid up in the air, which obviously I'd like to kind of keep continuing to do. Don't know if when they're 18 though, they might not let me do that. But on the other side, it's also a logo of a hourglass. That's the word I was looking for, and that sort of represents time. And I think all of this is very, very interesting because the way I kind of think about it is that I would potentially have 18 years, maybe even less, who knows, with my child. And within those 18 years, I would at least like to think they grow up to be a competent adult, and I myself grow up to be a competent father to them. So that's sort of the gist of the logo and also the title of the show. And really the crux of it all, the core of the show, is to chat to parents and dads out there from all walks of life, different careers. How are they sort of taking fatherhood? How are they growing up? How are they sort of seeing their child go from A to B? How do they feel? And all that kind of good stuff. To catch everyone up to speed, I am a dad of one, and I realize the more and the deeper I go into this thing called fatherhood, which in itself feels almost like a job, I'm starting to realize that there is never going to be a manual or an instruction on how to parent or how to become a dad, or what are certain milestones that a parent, or more specifically in my instance, a dad would expect to see as their kid grows up. Like, what are some signs that I'm becoming a better father? There really is a manual for that. Most dads that I have been speaking to sort of over the last year plus, ever since I realized I was going to be a father, is that everyone seems to take fatherhood very differently. Based on the age of their kids, they would suggest different things. Based on their career, they would suggest different things. Based on their own personal age, they would also suggest different things. So I thought all that was pretty interesting. And yes, while I realize that there are plenty of parenting podcasts out there ran by very, very successful parents, this podcast is not really a podcast that is suggestive in nature or another way to think about it is it's not really a podcast to kind of give any advice. It more so serves as a bit of a platform for me and you, dear listener, to learn about what it's like to grow up and become a dad. And so the format, and as long as I can keep up with this on top of all the other stuff of, my actual career, being a coach, a clinical nutrition, all that good stuff, being a father, a husband, as long as I keep on top of all of that stuff, jiu-jitsu, another hobby of mine, that this is the format. Ideally, I would like to have one interview per month, depending on how many I can kind of string up. It's going to be one interview, or I guess a conversation between myself and someone else, ideally a parent, followed by a reflective episode. So essentially an interview or a conversation that I will be having will kind of be divvied up into two parts. One, the actual conversation that sort of ensues, and the second part to that being sort of more of a solo episode of me reflecting on the conversation that has just passed. So that will be sort of a completely separate recording to the first recording itself. And I think that the way I sort of envision this is that I want to take the conversation that happened, because it's going to be pretty free-flowing. It's a one-take conversation, low-budget show. Hey, what do you expect? And then taking a few days after editing and sort of reflecting on it, and then kind of giving my impressions on what are some takeaways on my end, what are some biases that I agree, not agree with, what I like, dislike about the conversation, kind of obviously mainly sort of centered around being a father and being a parent. So that's sort of the format. Ideally, I would have one conversation a month followed by one sort of reflective episode a month. But yeah, if this hobby really sort of takes off and I'm able to have more conversations, which I would definitely enjoy, then that might turn into more and more per month. We'll see how things go. Here's the next one as well. And as parents, I think most parents will probably agree with this. And unlike being or working in a career or being in an industry of some way, shape, or form, maybe you own your own business, maybe you're a manager of a restaurant, maybe you're a CEO, maybe you're a teacher, or something along those lines. Most industries, most careers, even if you're flying full solo and running your own business, there is more than likely going to be a situation where you can hire mentors and professionals or people who you trust in the workplace to kind of ask for help if you need help, right? And kind of, I guess, more close to heart or close to my kind of career is that we generally tell people, hey, if you have any type of issue with getting healthier or improving your nutrition or your performance, want to gain muscle, all that kind of good stuff, and you don't know what to do, you want to kind of filter it out, seek professional help. It's kind of like in the workplace, if you're answering to a manager, they would generally say, not always they would welcome this, but they would say it is that, hey, if you have any questions, please do come to me and I'm more than happy to answer it, right? So there's always someone that you can kind of almost refer to in your professional career for the most part. Parenting, not really, right? And I think parenting is a full-time job. It is really, in essence, a full-time job, particularly if you are going to sort of take the mantle of making sure that you're going to do your best to nurture and be with your children as they grow up. It's literally sort of unique to everyone, right? And so there really isn't a manual. Like the closest thing you can potentially think of is maybe asking your own parents on how they parent you to become the person that you are today if you're listening to this. And that is still going to be very different, because in my instance, when my parents parent me as I was growing up sort of in the 90s and early 2000s, it's a very different situation for a child growing up in 2010s and above, and for those who have younger families like myself, grow parenting a kid from now until moving forward is going to be very different. And if you ask your grandparents, like if you've got grandparents and how they parent your parents, that's going to be very different too. The 70s, the 60s, that's a very different time too. So there really isn't like a manual because every generation is different. And I think that in itself is a very interesting situation that a lot of parents sort of don't realize until they become parents, because it's like, oh, now I'm a parent. There really isn't a manual. You're sort of rote learning. You're learning on the job. You're making all the mistakes, and you're kind of like, hey, like, are they doing it? Am I doing it right? If my friends are doing it another way, it seems like their kids are doing really, really happy, really fine. Should I be doing that? Like, yes, no, you try it, that doesn't work. So yeah, there's potentially one of like a conversation that might happen with all the potential guests that I might bring on. So yeah, that's all I have really, and sort of this pilot episode again kind of serves as a starting point on what this podcast will be, and just to kind of close out this episode as well. This is purely a hobby. I have always wanted to start something like this ever since the birth of my child. And I never really got around it because I have very bad imposter syndrome. But it kind of dawned on me that, you know what, like, I'm always, like, for those who know me, I'm a huge advocate of not being shy about asking for help. And while I can ask for help, it's probably a lot easier for me to just go, hey, I'm going to ask someone who, just a general advice, put it in a format of like an audio video podcast situation and just put it out there, right? And rather than keeping all the conversations and the good nuggets to myself, I'm going to be like, hey, like, this is what we talked about. Like, see if it applies to you. If it doesn't, don't worry. If it hits home, great. If there's just one takeaway from a 30-minute conversation, that's all good too. So yeah, interested to see where this podcast goes. As you can hear from my voice, this is a very impromptu pilot recording. Really, that's sort of what parenting is, eh? Like, it's just impromptu. You just kind of pop the baby out and hit the ground running, and off you go. So I'll be interested to see where this goes. I'll be interested to have these conversations with all these people. There's probably going to be comments as well, like, are we going to invite mums on here? The podcast title is purely reflective on me. I would like to have mums on here, but as you can imagine, a lot of the conversations I personally have are a lot more with dads, because I can sort of relate to them and they can relate to me a little bit more. Of course, I'm going to try to bring on some awesome female guests on here as well. So yeah, really looking forward to it. We'll see how this goes and talk to you in episode 1. This all goes good.